Big banks and the question of their profits have been the source of plenty of public anger since the beginning of the financial crisis. Now, new fees for consumers are putting them in the spotlight again. Swiping a debit card is about to get more expensive for tens of millions of Americans. The biggest bank in the country, Bank of America, says it will tack on a new fee, $5 a month, when customers use a debit card to make purchases. The reaction was immediate.
I can use the ATM without having to pay fees, so now if they're going to start charging me fees, it kind of defeats the purpose of why I signed up with them in the first place.
In a phone interview, Bank of America spokeswoman Ann Pace called the move a sign of the times.
Clearly, the economics of offering a debit card have changed with the recent regulations. As a result, we've decided to introduce a monthly usage fees.
Bank of America won't charge customers using one of its 20,000 ATMs. The announcement comes after legislation was passed last year to regulate the financial industry. One provision directed the Federal Reserve to cap so-called swipe fees that banks could charge merchants when customers use debit cards. The Fed set that cap at 21 cents per transaction, which will go into effect tomorrow. That's a big cut from the previous average of 44 cents per transaction, fees that yielded $19 billion for banks in 2009. Bank of America is the biggest bank so far to add a monthly fee, but it won't be the last, as giants Wells Fargo and J.P. Morgan Chase are now testing $3 debt card fees. And we debate the new fees now with David Lazarus, consumer and business columnist for the Los Angeles Times, and Richard Hunt, president of the Consumer Bankers Association, a trade group representing the country's leading retail banks. We invited a representative from Bank of America, but they declined. David Lazarus, I'll start with you. You wrote in your column today, Bank of America isn't just having its cake and eating it too, it's serving itself another piece. So why do you think this new fee is wrong?
Well, it's not so much that it's wrong. I don't think anyone begrudges the banks charging a fair profit for a fair service. And they are offering a lot of convenience. They are offering fraud protection. They are offering overdraft protection. The question here is, how much does it really cost the banks to process a debit card transaction? And how much do these ancillary services cost? Well, here's an example. The Federal Reserve says that it pretty much costs about 4 cents to process a debit card transaction, considering the huge economies of scale. 4 cents. So that means the current average of 44 cents represents a 1,000% profit. So now that we know that as of tomorrow, that's going to be cut in roughly half to 21 cents, well, that's still a 500% profit. If you can't make money off of a 500% profit margin, you're in the wrong line of work.
All right, Richard Hunt, as a general proposition, why is this being done by the banks right now?
Because we're forced to. I assure you the banks would not have raised fees on any single customer. They didn't have to. The fact of the matter is Congress interjected itself through the Dick Durbin Amendment that told us how much we could charge for a product. Now, I don't think McDonald's would appreciate if they were told how much they would charge for a hamburger or for a Coke. We don't want to do this. We have no choice to do this to stay in business.
But as he said, when the Federal Reserve looked at this, they set what they thought was a fair price.
Okay, well, that's half the story. The Durbin Amendment only allowed us to recoup the cost for the actual transaction, not for development of the card, not for processing, not for marketing, not for the call center. That would be like McDonald's only being able to charge for dispersing the Coke, but not ordering the Coke or marketing the Coke.
Mr. Lazarus?
Well, there's so many moving parts of this. Bank of America says that they'll lose about $2 billion in revenue as a result of this. But they're not saying they're going to lose any money. What they're in fact saying is they're going to make less money as a result of this. And so they're really trying to make good to their shareholders at this point with this $5 a month or $60 a year fee that's going to be imposed. And let's look at the numbers. B of A says that this is going to put them down $2 billion, but they've got 57 million consumer and small business accounts. Now, if just a majority, not all of them, just a majority use debit cards, that means they're going to have a windfall of $3 billion. So they come out $1 billion ahead out of all this. Where's the fairness in all of that?
Well, Mr. Hunt, so is it making less money or making money at all?
Sure it is. Look, we want to give people free checking accounts. Unfortunately, we can't do that anymore. Decades of generations have seen free checking going forward. That's not going to be the case anymore. We want to make sure the customer is happy. We want to keep customers at our banks. There are 7,100 banks in this country. We surely know that if the customer's not happy, they're going to go across the street to another bank and open a different checking account. We want to keep them at our banks.
How much does it cost to process a debit card
Well,
transaction?
if you go from A to Z, from the very beginning to the very end, it's somewhere around 35 to 36 cents. If you listen to Senator Durbin, where you can only recoup the cost of the actual transaction at the actual point of sale, where Michelle Obama went to Target yesterday in Alexandria, Virginia, that's a whole lot less. But there's a whole lot more to the transaction than the point of sale transaction.
Including what?
Making the card, the fraud cost, distribution of the card, the 800 number, all sorts of factors.
So your sense is that the Fed figure of 21 and the lower figure that he just raised is wrong, punitive, or what?
Yes and no. The Fed was instructed by the Congress what they could calculate in their fees. The Fed could not calculate the entire set of fees, just a snapshot of fees at the very end. Again, we did not want to charge our customers. We were forced to by Congress interjecting themselves into the marketplace.
Mr. Lazarus, what is it about the figuring out the exact cost of this transaction for you? Is that what it's about?
Well, I'll repeat. I don't think anyone begrudges the banks charging a fair profit for a fair service, but the banks are not forthcoming as to what this really costs. I think Richard, no offense intended, just pulled that 31-cent number out of the air, especially when the Federal Reserve, no less, says that 21 cents represents a reasonable and proportional return, and yet the Fed also says the actual cost is 4 cents, and in fact, some consumer advocates say it's even less. It might just be a penny or two. So these fees are pure gravy for the banking industry, and just because their revenue is coming down, well, what that means is basically when they have to charge a reasonable rate for the service, then they get a reasonable return, and therefore what they were making before was essentially unreasonable. Now, shareholders might not like that loss in revenue, but if you're going to treat your customers fairly, then charging a reasonable and fair rate is how you do it.
Mr. Hunt, as we said, this is part of a larger change here, and there are banks looking to make up fees in various ways, right? Eliminating free checking, for example. Should consumers expect to pay more in coming years?
Well, unfortunately, they probably will have to because of the overregulation by Congress. We knew Congress would do one of two things when we had the economic collapse. They would do nothing or they would overreact. Remember, we had overdraft fee reform. We've had credit card reform. We now have had debit card reform. It's an overregulated economy right now.
But didn't they react out of a sense of what had happened in the crisis and the bailout? And, this is why the public would be upset.
I understand why the public is upset. Interchange had absolutely nothing to do with the economic collapse. Absolutely nothing. It was a political maneuver by Senator Durbin because he didn't believe that retailers should be charging a certain fee for a product, a benefit they were receiving.
So, Mr. Lazarus, you write your column for consumers. What is your advice?
Well, my advice would be, contrary to what Richard says, it's not easy to shop with your feet because all of the big banks are probably going to follow suit. As you said, Wells and Chase are already experimenting with similar fees. It's more than likely, considering the herd mentality that reigns in this industry, that they'll all start charging these debit card fees once one of them gets away with it. Your only alternative pretty much is probably going to be a credit union, and they're going to get away with the fee-free checking accounts, the fee-free debit cards. The problem is you're going to give up a lot of convenience as a result for that. So you could say that these fees are a premium for convenience, and if the banks wanted to sell them as that, then okay, that's a little truth in advertising. But at this point, consumers are going to have to make that choice between convenience on the one hand and low fees on the other.
And Mr. Hunt, do you expect this to have an impact on consumer use of debit cards or other behavior?
Sure, I think it will. A couple years ago when Congress redid the Credit Card Reform Act, they shifted people to the debit card. And I think that was the right decision for Congress to do and for the marketplace. I think what's going to happen now, people are going to have to go back to credit cards. Hopefully they'll have better financial positioning by paying off the debt. This is not just a large bank issue. This is a credit union and small bank issue. You're going to see thousands of small community banks go under because of regulation by Congress.
All right. We'll keep watching. Richard Hunt, David Lazarus, thank you both very much.